Hello everyone, my name is Zunova and I am a PhD student here at Charles University in Prague. Today I would like to tell you a little bit about my research focusing on challenges of journalism in the classroom, in particular on the ethical choices Czech and American students make. I was born and raised in Prague, but during my studies I was lucky enough to spend a couple of semesters in the US as well. I have always been interested in media ethics, and I was frankly quite surprised to see how differently were my American classmates dealing with some moral dilemmas in comparison to what I knew from my home university. Charles University was established 672 years ago in 1348. Although you can still sense the rich history in our old faculty buildings or, for example, during graduation ceremonies, the Institute of Communication Studies and Journalism located in the center city keeps up with the current media trends and provided me with an excellent background for my research. As I mentioned before, this is just a pilot study. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic closed borders and classrooms in both Czech Republic and the US. So far, I have visited 4 universities with journalism programs: Temple University in Philadelphia, the University of Richmond, Masaryk University in Brno, and of course, Charles University in Prague. Thanks to the amazing attitude of several professors, I was allowed to actually attend the classes and share my lengthy questionnaire with the students in person. They had to answer multiple questions about ethically challenging topics. We discussed how to stay unbiased, how to avoid secondary victimization, or the threats of social media-driven journalism. Before we get to break down the key points of my current research, I should mention a few significant differences between American and Czech higher educational system. Most importantly, Czech students study at universities for free. American students have to pay, usually a lot. American students apply for the whole university. Czech students, by the time they finish high school, have to be decided what will their future program be. Students often send out multiple applications within one university and then go through a series of exams and interviews designed for the specific field. This is important because when we are comparing, we need to realize that while Czech students have already decided they wanted to work in the media department, American students might still be juggling several fields, trying to make up their minds. Students in America are also younger. 2 respondents said they were 17, while Czech students usually graduate the high school at the age of 19. However, the average age of participating students fluctuated between 19 and 22. Also, the bachelor's degree cycle lasts 4 years in the US, compared to only 3 years in the Czech Republic. My analysis includes a minority of Czech grad students as well. Still, since it's hard to compare years of study due to the different program lengths, for purposes of this research, it is better to stick with the age-based comparison. And last but not least, the whole organization of a school year looks quite different. An ethics class in the Czech Republic usually means once-a-week lecture. Meanwhile, in America, students within each course often meet twice or 3 times a week. Additionally, since the students are younger, the instructors regularly assign homework. In comparison, Czech students do not have that many projects, but are extremely busy during month-long exam period. Although this system requires more self-organization, discipline, and responsibility, students are left with plenty of free time to find a part-time job. This explains data extracted from my research sample. 36% of Czech students are simultaneously employed in the media industry, while the same is true for only 13% of American students. Many previous studies have discussed that longer newsroom experience seriously disrupts the ethical standards of journalists. However, as we find out in a few moments, for journalists still attending university, this is not necessarily true. The first part of the research focused on students' values. It was interesting to see that both nations agree on many topics. For example, both groups regard the importance of their individual moral codes very highly, or agree that journalists should provide the audience with a full set of diverse information, rather than form public opinion. Nevertheless, as suggested earlier, there was a disagreement in terms of the educational routine. American students often debate during their ethical courses and have much more practical assignments than their Czech peers. However, journalism ethics courses in the US are usually taught together with media law, while in the Czech Republic it is more often a separate course. But let's take a look at another data. On these charts, 1 means no importance at all, while 5 means crucial importance. As we can see, all students, Czechs and Americans, believe in the essential role of journalists as someone who should bring you information. They also think that journalists should serve as so-called watchdogs of democracy and promote the values of a democratic state. In terms of external regulators, such as councils, ethics committees, or other institutions overseeing the proper functioning of media, students from both countries again found an agreement. The average answer scored between 3 and 4, meaning that, however they realize its importance, they do not consider it for a key factor. As mentioned before, the strongest disagreement was in terms of the structure of their journalism program. Additionally, while students in the US think ethics has enough coverage even during other classes, Czech students think it might be better. Czechs also think journalism is more about talent and practice, while for Americans, education seems to be quite important as well. And one last comparison, American students regard the duty of journalists to educate young audiences more highly than students from the Czech Republic. After evaluating all the answers, I decided to choose 3 additional topics to discuss today. The first one is students' attitude towards social media. It is interesting to see that American students regard it much more as a relevant news source. As we can see, the only exception is Twitter, which both nationalities consider for the most newsworthy platform. The last position belongs to Snapchat, which is quite a popular social media app in the US. However, it represents a minimal journalistic asset for Czech students. But American students are slightly younger, and social media like Snapchat or Instagram target a younger generation. Nevertheless, it is clear that Czech students regard social media more as a personal platform than a news source. To support this argument, we can look into another proposed question. I asked the student whether it is appropriate for journalists to share their political views on their social media platforms. While more than 40% of Americans answered a definite no, only a little over 20% of Czechs came with the same response. And one last example. The students were given this ethical case. There has been a shooting attack. Police have released the name of the attacker, who subsequently committed suicide. However, the authorities have not provided any details. You found out that the shooter had an openly accessible profile on Facebook. Will you use the information from it in your reporting? Almost 60% of American students answered absolutely yes, and not even 15% chose definitely not. It is clear to see that for American students, social media is simply a crucial journalistic tool. It is also interesting that 25% of Americans stated that they would leave the decision up to their editor-in-chief, which leads us to another interesting phenomenon. Many scenarios offer the choice to consult with a boss or leave the decision entirely up to him. As it turned out, American students love this option. They also like to consult their dilemmas with colleagues. We can definitely see the influence of the discussion-based structure of ethical courses I mentioned earlier. Americans are used to a heated debate and the fact that an opinion is born through a conversation. In comparison, Czech students work quite independently. They would too discuss some issues with the editor-in-chief, but more often they believe that even during complicated personal dilemmas, they can stay unbiased. That was clear from the results of these 3 ethical cases. Number 1. The editor-in-chief sends you to interview a politician who is your friend from high school. Number 2. You write music reviews. A band sends you tickets for an upcoming concert and promotional products. And number 3, a new shopping center is to be built near where you live. You have signed a petition to fight against the construction, since the new building would block your view of the city. The editor-in-chief wants to send you to report the case. As we can see in the chart, many more Czech students would report the events because, without further consultation, they believe they can maintain their impartiality. But what if on stake is not a personal reputation, one's career, or a good name of the medium? What if instead innocent people could suffer an additional trauma from reporting? A phenomenon called secondary victimization was another wildly discussed topic. Even though we cannot say Americans do not care about causing additional harm, their loyalties also lie with readers or editor-in-chief, definitely more than for Czech students. Once again, we can look at a concrete scenario. Students were given this case. During a Southwest airline accident in April 2018, one passenger died. A fefew hours after the tragedy, the New York Times reported the event and included quotes from friends and colleagues. Students were asked whether they would approach them so soon after the tragedy happened. In this particular case, it seemed inappropriate to 48% of American students and 82% of Czech students. You can see the further information on this chart. And let's take a look at one more practical exercise students had to deal with. They were supposed to consider different ethically challenging aspects connected with the publication of a photo of children who died during a gas attack in Syria. Now, if you have a weaker stomach, you might want to look away for a few moments. However, this or similar photos were published by reputable worldwide media. Therefore, this horrifying footage, unfortunately, has its purpose in my research. Here is the photo students had to evaluate. And it's gone. And now to the results. First, students had to decide how they would capture the terrible aftermath. In follow-up questions, I asked students whom they would take into consideration while deciding whether to publish it. Here is the concrete data. As we can see, the results support the thesis that while comparing these two nations, Americans care more about the business-driven aspects of this dilemma, or the editor-in-chief, while Czech students direct their attention towards children who could accidentally see the photo or people close to the victims. To sum it up, so far we can highlight a few main differences between Czech and American students. On the bright side, Americans are not afraid to use social media as news source. In the age of user-generated content, this seems to be the right step forward. They realize it can serve as a professional platform, which should be used accordingly. That, for example, means not sharing private political views. However, students have to realize that each journalist should have a strong personality, with even stronger voice. Not being afraid to ask for help when needed is indeed a virtue, but consulting everything with the boss is not always possible. Additionally, it seems that American students are often not very attentive towards those the report might potentially harm. In comparison, Czech students are quite self-sufficient, which is understandable regarding their longer newsroom experience, age, and educational system, which requires good self-discipline. They also seem to be ethically more sensitive when it comes to causing harm. However, there is a lot they can learn from their American peers. For example, to implement ethics through discussion or ask for advice when unsure. That being said, we can elaborate on which improvements might help to each country. Czech students mentioned the lack of practical exercises. Maybe more special projects regarding social media might spark deeper discussion about social media ethics. Additionally, personally, I think one class a week is not enough for such a fundamental course. Apart from a lecture, there should be an extra discussion-based seminar, raising the number of weekly classes to at least a couple. And American students, it might be beneficial to separate ethical courses from those dealing with media law. Maybe if students had more time to discuss what is morally right and not only what is lawfully allowed, their ethical standards towards others would grow even higher. But to end on a positive note, it is good to see that even though Czech students have quite an extensive newsroom experience, it does not mean that their ethical attitudes are any worse than those of American students. It is why we would argue that the academic environment forms their beliefs maybe even more. Therefore, it is essential to keep adjusting the syllabi to current trends in journalism.